because we make a lot of recordings together. So go ahead and answer that again.
So what I'm expecting is I kind of want a different recording because I know we talk about Satanism and all of that stuff a lot, but I'm really just interested in continuing the conversation about the future and ideas and how possibly the present could affect it.
Yeah, that's funny. You want, but this is my conversation, and it's funny how that works. You're directing my interview or my conversation, and that's part of what I want to talk to you about. That's interesting, like what you want, because you want to talk about things, and I don't mind that, but it has to do with like and I'm going to read some stuff I wrote down. Dominance and submission. I notice this is you, Claudia. Let's say, add your name to the zine you did with us called Burdella Bugby Soliloquies, and you put your name before mine. Or you phrase a conversation I had with you as an interview when it was more of a conversation. Or you uploaded it without asking if you could. Asking and rebelling, ask against the answer is okay. Not asking to use another's work might make waves more than you would if you could just disagree. Though I do go with the saying sorry over asking permission. Is there righteous rebellion, a righteous way to climb or to dominate that is strong versus what I perceive as passive? When I mentioned, okay, so that's just quick notes, and that might not make a lot of sense. So I'm not trying to throw you off here. Let me get back to my stream here so I can.
No, it makes sense. It seems like a question about ego, if that makes sense.
Well, it is and it isn't. You know, I don't know if I have a question about ego because I understand what's happening. You know, I've been through this a bunch. It's an idea to ask you a question about, like, dominance and submission, like that kind of. Yeah, it is about ego. Yes, certainly. So I'll ask you about the perverse ego versus the other stuff, because just now we start off and you're like you're starting to direct something that's mine. This is my project, motherfucker. I'm the motherfucker who said, hey, I wanted to have a conversation with you and record it. I haven't had that before. You've been the one interviewing me. And so when you phrased one thing like it was a conversation as an interview, it's phrasing it as you being the dominant I'm submissive to you. When you interview someone, it could be perceived that way. Now, I don't perceive it that way, but the general, when we communicate in this realm, when we're recording stuff to broadcast to a lot of people, I communicate to the lowest common denominator. So I communicate to everyone. I don't communicate just about my perception. Okay. Because I don't necessarily perceive it like that. I perceive interviews as an exchange of intellect usually. But a lot of people, and when you're publishing it on Twitter and you say, Shane Bugbee interviewed me, that is something that you're flexing. And it does become like I'm either in a submissive position or a uplifting position, but it has more to do with you than it has to do with us, which is a conversation between us, which is not a bad thing. And we are talking within the satanic concept. And of course, you know, you're going to think about yourself first. I get that, which most people do, I think, anyway.
That makes sense.
So let me hear what you know, I don't want to ramble on, but I think you understand what I'm going for. So go ahead and let me hear what you have to say about what I just said.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Maybe there is some sort of inner little bits of ego that's unconscious with that. But for the most part, a lot of that is sort of marketing, because with that, I think there was a lot of interesting things said, and I want to get the whole Satanic Almanac thing like really going. I'm really into that idea. And that whole sort of idea is included in that conversation. So it's like,
be specific. What whole idea?
Well, we were talking about the future of Satanism in that conversation, and I was talking about some really cool stuff, which I think I'm going to include in, or at least try to get included in the Satanic Almanac.
I think you mean we were talking about some really cool stuff.
Yeah, we were talking about some really cool stuff.
You see how I can fight for myself here?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I'm just going based off my memory. So
and your ego and yourself. You're thinking about yourself. But a lot of time, I think it's like here's the lesson here, young person. Is the idea is there's a lot of times, like I'll tell people I work with people. I don't, even though they work for me. Like I worked with Peter Gilmore. I worked with Doug Mesner. I worked with Stanton LaVey. No, they worked for me. I worked with Anton LaVey. No, he worked for me. I can say it like that because that's a fact. Okay. But I don't. I say it in a respectful tone because especially because of who I'm dealing with. Everyone, if I say that person worked for me, it puts them in a perceptive way, in a general perception way, it puts them in a submissive position or something under me. So I don't do that because I want to continue to work with them eye to eye. And I don't look down on people that I'm working with, because if I look down on people I'm working with, they're going to have an animosity and it's going to hurt me in the end. So I'm actually a concept I've come up with like a long time ago called be more greedy. It's like, I just don't want to feed my ego in the moment and say, yeah, that bitch works for me. Lemmy from Motorhead worked for me. He did. He worked for me. I employed Lemmy. But I'm going for a bigger picture. So when I say Lemmy worked with me, it's to not upset, it's the truth. Both are the truth. He worked with me and he worked for me. I can choose to phrase it in two different ways. One is an immediate feed of my ego, and one is a larger, be more greedy concept. And, and in Chicago, that stuff's real clear. Like people cut you off real quick. Hey, motherfucker, I ain't working for you. I'm here to help you. They'll say something like that. They'll be quick. They are hyper sensitive to words of dominance, if that makes sense. But go ahead. I don't mean to interrupt if I did.
No, you make sense. And I will be completely honest. I didn't fully consider all of that sort of all that sort of thing with that.
How could you? You're young. You're very young. And I'm saying this from a mentor kind of way, where it's like, I've had the same attitude you're having. It's young and it's like, it's all about me and it's cool. It's nothing wrong. If I thought something was wrong, I would say, I think that's fucked up. Okay. I don't think any of this is wrong. What I'm saying is learn from my mistakes, youngster. This might be a better way to navigate sometimes, is to be thoughtful of what you're saying to people and around them, because if you upset them or hurt their ego, you're not going to get anything else out of them. And you want to be in business with someone or friends with them for as long as possible, because you get much more out of them than a one-time, hit. You get way more out of them. So it's sort of that. I've done the same thing, and I've noticed that this is the better way to probably navigate, especially amongst satanic people and people with big egos. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm taking notes.
Yeah, and I think it's funny. I laugh about it. Like, I had a great laugh when I get that zine and it's like Berdella Bugby. I'm like, who the fuck you are putting your fucking name before mine? The fuck are you? You don't even, no one knows you because of me. What the fuck is going on here? I'll fucking chop this zine up in a million pieces. That's what I thought when I first saw it. I was sort of joking, but you have to fight. This is also an idea of, you have to fight for your place on the the king of the hill. You got to keep fighting. It's like the alpha, let's say, as the joke, the alpha always has to fight, and they get, they at some point retire because they can't fight anymore. But along my whole career, all I've had to fight for my credit. Like, hey, make sure my name's on there. Make sure my name's on there. Make sure my name's on there. Make sure it's spelled right. And that's been for 35 years. And so, that's just part of the game too. People are never going to think of, they're always like what you did. I think what you did, you're saying it here is so natural. Like, you're a natural Satanist. So it's so natural that you're like, Berdella Bugby. It's so natural to put your name first, your ego, you're proud, and it's cool. It's cool. I was proud of it. The zine that you did, I thought it was cool. I'm proud of you. But that's when I just had a good laugh about it, because it's like, you hear rock stars, like when I was growing up, the concept was always like, whose name goes first on the bill, being a rock concert, the bill being a hand flyer before it was digital. We had paper flyers and they'd call them a bill. and whose name goes on the top, and they'd argue who was the oldest, who sold more records. And sometimes they do tours where the older person was the headliner, even though they weren't selling tickets. It was someone else. And sometimes it was or sometimes the older person was opening up because it just, but it was an ego thing. And some older people would not open up for people. They were like, no, I'm big and we're always going to stay big. We're never opening for people, which is something I noticed Marilyn Manson doesn't have a problem with. And he's got this healthy ego going. Him going out on tour recently, opening for some band, Five Finger Death Punch. A lot of people in the entertainment bit could say, ooh, that's a hit. That's ouch, man. He's a headliner. He shouldn't be doing that. And a lot of management people would say that. Don't do that. Don't do that. It's bad for your career. But he did it. And that's what shows more strength. He has more strength, that confidence that they talk about this. There's a confidence there that goes, I don't give a fuck. I'm going to blow these kids away no matter where I'll open up. I'll start at 3 PM. I'm going to fucking be the best thing there, which is cool. If any of that makes sense.
I think it makes sense.
Well, think about it right now and don't tell me if you're sure about it, if it makes sense. I'm kidding. We got anything to say to this?
I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I can't really speak for at the moment with exact memory, but I do try to give responsibility to the responsible. Like, I didn't want to not include your name in that.
In what?
In the zines and stuff. Like, I like to give credit where credit's due. And in the moment, maybe it might have been unconscious that I put my name first. It might have been conscious. I don't exactly know at this point in time, because I was kind of just making something, and it's kind of just when I make something, what happens.
I think it has. Yeah, it has more to do. I appreciate that it gives credit where credit's due, but I also think it has to do with, you coming up with the title of being the Shane Bugbee historian and attaching yourself to the time you've spent with me, the time you've listened to interviews and we've spent together. So it's like you're it's like a fucking dog. You're pissing on your shit. You're taking ownership of stuff. It's sort of hilarious to me. That's how I see it. And that's how it would be for me when I did, like Michael Hunt Publishing. I'm taking ownership of it. It's mine.
I guess that makes sense. Though I guess I'm less trying to take ownership, more trying to just like showcase something that I think a lot of, like, that's what the whole summer of Bugbee was like, there's a lot of things being said, but they're evidently not true if you do the research, but I'm the only one that I've ever seen that actually has done the research. So I'm going to present this in a format that people will listen to.
And you're saying there's a lot of things being said about me.
Well, there were. Then we made that book, and since then, I think I've seen a lot less of that.
I'm just making that clear here because we're recording something that'll be broadcast. So, yeah, right, and I appreciate that. But that was something I wrote down too in my notes. It's like you. Oh fuck! Did I closed all my shit? Damn it! I should close my notes. Is that when you? Let me find my notes again. That thing about where is this note? I know it's right here. Okay, yeah, it was like when you mentioned you were the only one downloading my stuff from archive.org. What are you getting at there? And my point of that is like, it was like, do you think like you're the only person that has approached me to do interviews, or
no,
or stalks my history?
I don't think I'm the only one, because there's certainly other people, but I think I'm the only one that's really gone at it without any sort of like nuance, because I went around and I asked a ton of people. Like, I was asking like everyone from like the Satanic Temple, I was asking Church of Satan people, and it was like, you're all telling me no, but at the same time you're also calling yourselves Satanists, and I just didn't understand this whole creating a devil within like devilish circles sort of thing. So if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. It does. I appreciate it. But I responded to you because whatever you were writing me, whenever it was smart. Whatever it was just smart. It came at me, was like, oh, this is interesting. I didn't even see, a youngster or anything. I was like, I just saw smart.
Well, what I was asking you about was the second half of a conversation between you, Doug, and Timothy Wiley that apparently there's no actually. I've yet to find it. I've been going through all those like files you sent me. I've yet to find any part 2 to it because that's like my main goal to find right now because I'm really interested in seeing if I can find the second part of that Timothy Wiley interview.
Yeah.
But
it's probably gone, or it's on older hard drives I have, and I don't know how to I don't have the money to get them transferred. I wish you did. I wish you had funding, or someone had funding to come and take all my shit and look through it. I would be happy to give it to someone who had some funding, something.
Give me a bit. I'll be the one. I'm certain I'll be that person because I don't think anyone else should egotistically.
What?
Give me a bit. I'll be the one to do that. I think I should be at least egotistically.
Yeah, I agree with you. You've put a lot of time in, but it's just like, for me, it's the same thing. I couldn't hire anyone to do it. I'm just like, even, I want to get that stuff out there. I'd like to send it to you. I don't even have, I don't have enough funds to get all that stuff, it's in a storage area. And so I do hope it gets out there. And it has to have you have to have like what has to happen is you have to have like a budget, like, oh, okay, I need to rent. I need to have a computer. I need to have this much hardware, the hard drive space, a memory space. I need to have this much time. I need to be able to have this money to pay people to help me with this. And you need to come up with a budget in order to do it. And then try to raise those funds somehow, which is what I'm trying to do for a video project right now, is I have to come up with a budget of time, how long it'll take me. This is how you make movies and stuff. This is how you pitch ideas for scripts for filmmakers, to get people to give you money. Like, well, it'll take me 2 weeks, this many hours. I need this many people. I need this many cameras. I need this many lights. So you need to figure every single thing out in order to ask for money. That's what people want. They want a pitch and a budget. And so you sort of, if you're looking into doing that stuff, you have to come up with that budget of time and money, and then you're able to, and then you pitch an idea, like, this is the idea, and then you're able to get grants or people that believe in the project to go, okay, I'll give you the money if you can get that, if you can get all that stuff and get this, and this is your idea. It looks good, the budget looks good, the numbers look good, the time looks good, you got to get it done in 3 weeks, okay, and then you get people to give you hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it. And so it's a thought.
That makes sense. I'm certainly going to start looking into doing that. Well, not looking into it. I'm going to start doing that.
Yeah, I got a lot of stuff, and I'd love to get it to you, or I'd love to figure out if that Wiley audio exists. There's a handful. The audio I'm real interested in is the one where I do an interview with the priest from I think not DePaul University, but some religious institution in Chicago. A Jesuit priest interviewed me about the Satanic Temple's Black Mass. And I believe that situation, that is the nucleus of the psi warfare that went on in my life. Because after that interview happened, it got real intense in my life. Like, I got real big harassment, real wild. So I'm not really sure, and I probably will die not knowing all the stuff that happened behind my back. But that was an interesting thing, and I just want to find that audio and be able to post it online.
Well, that's certainly a goal now.
Yeah, because that was like manufacturing consent shit. Like, that's how I feel like those people were looking to do, like a government kind of thing. Not saying they were, but like the government did with the Black Panthers or other things. They were trying to figure out how to discredit Satanism, how to discredit this stuff. I'm not sure what their goals were, but, of course, but I want to be able to have that evidence available for someone else in the future. Because I think there was something I know there was something shifty going on back then. But anyway. So, when you mentioned, okay, let me look at this prior to, okay. Yeah. So you were interested, like, let me just talk, let me go through my list and we'll go over your stuff then. Is there? Now, I asked you about the future of Satanism last time, but I want to know, what do you think of the past? What is your take on the past that led up to where we're at today?
I think that for most of the time that LaVey was alive, there was a very interesting and active, I guess, the Satanic Panic narrative was right. There was this sort of pervasive scene of Satanists around, but it wasn't in their sense of the word. I mean, I guess in some ways, if you consider it like the influence of Siege, maybe, but I don't think that's really Satanism. I guess there's some there's some loose connection there.
Yeah, you'd be wrong there. That the Siege had zero. It wasn't even on the radar back then. It only became popular later, 20 years later.
Well, yeah, but still, that sort of influence from LaVey that went into Siege, which
Might is Right had more influence than Siege.
Might is Right certainly did, but I'm just talking like culturally speaking, like currently in the last like 10 years, what's been relevant, which Atomwaffen, I'm pretty sure has been kind of relevant.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, just to find all these things that really intersect with Satanism, it's interesting. And I'm not saying that these things are Satanism. I'm saying that these things intersect. It's just interesting to see where Satanism fits in the history of everything altogether. I mean, like, I remember listening to you talk on, I think it was the Orbex and Pepper podcast. I think it was late 2023. And you were talking about how when you were talking to, I think it was a White Panther Party member or something, about how when LaVey he hit big, that whole theater of the absurd thing. And I find that, as well as the aesthetic terrorist movement, which was the successors in a sense. Well, wait, was it the theater, were the hippies part of the theater of the absurd, or was that after the theater of the absurd?
Well, I think the hippies were very much like, it was like people call woke today. It was a general cultural shift. Hippies were part of this cultural, the counterculture started to shift the culture, and the hippies were produced. And that's sort of how that works with counterculture becomes culture, becomes the predominant culture at some point. It wins. Counterculture is the future. You're seeing the future when you look into counterculture. And so the theater of the absurd was the Black Panthers, White Panthers, Brown Berets, Anton LaVey, the American Indian Movement, the Yippies, stuff like that. That was the counterculture, and that those outbursts, those things on TV looked romantic to people, and so it grew the hippie thing. What came first, the hippies or the Black Panthers? I don't really know. I don't really know. But they were the hippies are, I guess you could say, I would say it's not what came first. It's the groundswell of the counterculture creates the culture. So I'm not sure what came first, but that maybe the hippies were a pushback to at some point the predominant culture, and they became the culture. I think that was something. I would think the hippies were a reflection of the Vietnam War. They were the pushback to war, and that's how we became that counterculture grew. And I think the counterculture before that was a lot of stuff like civil rights movements, was jazz performers, blues artists. I think Malcolm X was counterculture. I know Malcolm X was counterculture. But he became culture. He became part of this culture. He became big.
So, okay, that makes sense. Sort of a chicken or the egg thing.
I wonder, yeah, but I'm rambling because I just drank some bunch of coffee, so you have to excuse me.
That's fine. I'm drinking coffee right now as we speak.
So the history. So what is your take on the stuff that branches off of Satanism or is attracted to it? I noticed you're attracted to things like a Boyd Rice or a James Mason for some reason. And what is that reason? Do you consider yourself fascist?
I don't consider myself fascist. I think it's an interesting term, especially how it's sort of maladapted to today. Because in my mind, fascist is a capital F word that was specifically in Italy. Everything that's now is lowercase f and kind of just not really that. I mean, certainly it has the whole idea. There's the idea of the corporate and state fusion, which I certainly see as kind of a reality. Well, not a reality, the reality right now. But I think it's interesting to see how that intermixes with Satanism, especially seeing as Satanism is, in theory, a radical individualist sect, except it's also apolitical. So within that, you can find fascists and you can find, that there is some sort of lineage in that. Because, I mean, even though it was less influential, Siege does quote Anton LaVey in the Satanic Bible as well. And, LaVey did view, in some sense, I'm not sure how much, I know that he didn't, Carla LaVey said with your interview with her, he might not have agreed with the people, but he had a journalistic and, I guess, sort of against sort of queer curiosity, queer in the sense of being, different and hated by society. Because, I mean, Anton LaVey is scarier than James Mason ever will be. You yourself are the one who's made the quite well point of saying that Satan is a word scarier than Nazi. So I'm very interested in how that links up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think LaVey. I think the thing is with LaVey is you sort of become nihilistic in a way. With Anton, I think is in a way with humanity when you're studying the dark side of humanity, which LaVey was a doctor in that realm where he's studying the ideas of what power is versus the illusions of power. That's why Satanism is part magic, and LaVey was also a magician because he understood magicians create illusions of power. He understood what power was and what an illusion was, and how illusions quite often are more powerful than the power that they create. The illusion is a big deal. It's a big deal. Hitler understood that, with, illusions, people build power illusions. And so high heels for men or women are this is the idea of power. So LaVey was probably, more into these groups because he's nihilistic and saying, yeah, this is what people do and this is how they think. And there's not too many new ideas out there. And, they're predisposed, as he would say about George Eric Hawthorne or anyone else. I think he said in the introduction to Might is Right, they're predisposed to those ideals because of where they grow up, because of their socioeconomic situation, stuff like that. It's the same with people who are attracted to a James Mason or to a Louis Farrakhan. They're usually ignorant and poor people, and I'm not saying Mason was wrong or Farrakhan's wrong about some of the stuff he's saying. What I'm saying is those folks attract the lowest common denominator because they simplify things in a way that is like religion does. Good versus evil, good and evil, good and bad, stuff like that. So it's like, anyway, I think that's the trip would be like, if I were to imagine LaVey with that stuff, is like him just shrugging his shoulders. Big fucking deal about this guy. He's one of a zillion people who've written the same book, Siege or whatever. This is what people are going to do. I don't, my take on LaVey. I don't think he was I think he couldn't stick him to the wall. Is the best way to explain Satanism and Satanists is they're interested in everything, and so I'm happy to hear that you are similar. You sound to be interested in everything, and taking, trying to figure things out for yourself.
Yeah, and I figured I obviously don't have the entire picture of of everything, but I don't know LaVey's politics. I won't claim to know them, and I never will, because I don't actually know. I can only go off what he said and wrote. I can't say what he actually thought, even though he was pretty honest as far as I know. But it's like, I don't particularly give a fuck what LaVey's politics actually were. Like, he could have been a full-blown fascist for all I care. I like his ideas.
Right. I like that. Exactly. But he wasn't a fascist. So I know that for a fact. And I know that because I've done the most research with that family than anyone. And it's just really, it's really obvious in every which way that I'm very correct about my take on LaVey.
I mean, he's the guy who allowed people to put hooks into their bodies and suspend from his house ceilings and stuff. I don't know how a fascist would allow that. For as queer as fascism is, that's queerer than fascism allows.
Well, that's one thing, but the concept of Satanism is not about enslaving people. It's about the freedom of being yourself, the freedom of humanity, the liberty of us as an animal, of a species, and to point out that we're caged in every respect. The Crowley did the same kind of work. It was about freeing us to be who and what we are. So that has zero to do with fascism. Fascism is about listen to who we want you to be. You will be who we want you to be, or else. There is nothing like that in the Satanic Bible. There's nothing like that in LaVey's work. There's nothing like that in any of his interviews. You will listen to me, or else. There's just nothing like it. It definitely is not like that. Satanism is more within it's more sorry, not sorry. That kind of thing, played out today. Satanism today is like sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, and then if you take it back to Crowley, in the Book of Lies, there's a chapter entitled Louis Ling, in which there's a line, I forget part of it, but it's, I'm an anarchist, but I'm not an anarchist in your sense of the word. I'm an anarchist in the sense that I'm feudalist, and that I think and it's like, it's kind of the same thing LaVey said in Satan Speaks, where he's like, Satanism is the only place where, you can be this whole jargon of political labels, including but not limited to, that include is not limited to both Zionism and Nazism, socialism and capitalism, communism and Bolshevism, and all these different things which seem like they would contradict. But if you think about being radical individualists, it makes so much sense, because Satanists can't be stuck to the wall. So it's all of these things at once, and it's none of them at the same time.
Yes.
It's a conglomerate of fluid thought.
Is that a quote? Is that a quote you just read?
It's a mixture of two different quotes that I can't quite remember the exact wording from.
Who are you quoting?
So the first part was from Aleister Crowley in the Book of Lies, and a poem of sorts called Louis Ling. The second part was Anton LaVey, and I was kind of just stringing the lineage along.
Right.
The progression of the idea, as well as encapsulating the idea of Satanism as a fluid thought concept.
That erodes constructs. That's something I came up with. That one there. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's it. You know, that's the simplicity of it. And I think LaVey as the artist is sort of mocking people, because as much as there is a deviation, we are not Satanists aren't everyone, and everyone is not a Satanist. But I think everyone, or a great deal of people, think that way. They are not so religious minded. Even when you have to be around some dim-witted motherfuckers when they just believe what's in their Bible. But most people who say, you know, they're Bible bangers or they're Christians or Catholics, when you get to talk to them, their ideas are all over the place. They're like, oh, that's Buddhist. Oh, that's that's this, that's communist, that's this. When you listen to them, when you hear them, most people are nuanced with their opinions. But if their preacher were sitting at the coffee table and they were to say something, and their preacher were to say, oh, that sounds satanic, they would, oh, I'm so sorry. Because those are the people that are probably not, I should not say probably, they are not satanic, because they're going to, you know, go back on the natural thought of a fucking human being. Our species is going to be all over the place. We're going to think about everything. We're not going to be so pigeonholed, you know. And so I I see LaVey's work, or the artist's work in general, real artists, as the people who save humanity as much, if not more, than science does. You know, the philosopher, the prophetic. You know, Neil Tyson talked about science killing philosophy, and I think about how in order to kill philosophy, you have to kill prophecy. You have to be able to see into the future, and science can't see into the future. Science deals with the past more than anything. How do we fix what, you know, like they're testing, you know, they're dealing with the past. But LaVey was prophetic. He was a prophet, which is incredible. You know, great artists are. And, you know, I'm not looking at him as a religious person. I'm like, wow, this shit he was saying, that people, again, like Tesla, other people that were creative minds, great artists, they were prophets.
Well, yeah.
They looked into the future. Wait, hold on. They looked into the future and saw what was coming, or they were willing to guess at what was going to be the future, at the risk of being laughed at and ridiculed. And LaVey was one of those great people. And, you know, a lot of the stuff that people laughed at him about are coming true right now. It's amazing to me. I love that stuff. And I think that's where I talk about with the creation of the Satanic Almanac, is Satanism is about eroding constructs. It's about looking into the future and going, what is next? What's going on here? What's happening here right now? The here and now. What's the talk on the street? What's the word on the bus? And then you're like, oh, everyone's talking about fascism, let's say this year, because of the president, or what's going on, the shift to right wing, the shift to taking food away from poor people. So how does that apply to Satanists? You know, and that's where you start getting off on in the Satanic Almanac once a year about going, what can we put out next April 30th that's going to be relevant to the next year? And we are in this heavy, you know, this moment, like, you know, this political moment. And then you look globally, and you look into the science of things, and you sort of try to play with poetry or artwork or whatever you can to put that into the Satanic Almanac, to sort of talk about the future. What is the future for us? And that's the human species. And then for us as Satanists.
I think the butterfly effect is something that should really be focused on, because in Satanism, it's the here and now, and the here and now is what creates what happens next.
Right. It's sort of like when I talk about that. Well, I'll let you finish that in a second. I just want to get this out. Like when I say influence is always forgotten but never dies, something like that. I have some quote out there where influence never dies, but it's always forgotten. And that means like Crowley's forgotten quite often when you see what he did, he influenced, or LaVey, or any artist, myself. What the fuck those motherfuckers. I'm talking about me. I've influenced things where I see my influence. I know it was not there in the culture before I did it. I know that. I was standing there 30 fucking years ago. I know what I did. I know it wasn't there before me. I know I did this. I know everything caught on. I know I had influence. Yet I'm forgotten, but my influence isn't dead. It's got a life of its own. And other people are using things that I did or I put forward as their own. You know, they're like, this is mine. This is my thoughts. And I'm like, no, that was a group, that was me or some of my friends. We did that. I watched that. And as much as that the older generation is forgotten, our influence will never die. And that's important to do as part of the species, is have influence while you're young or even old. It does, you know, I think relevance is relevance is a weird thing when people talk about relevance. They're sort of being ageist or something like that. They're talking about stuff like that, but relevance is a weird concept in and of itself. It's a moment, and things that are dead could be relevant again. Abe Lincoln is still fucking relevant. So I also say, like, you're relevant until you're dead, but you could be relevant beyond your death. You know, the goal maybe is to be relevant 1,000 years after your death. That's my goal.
Well, you know, it's kind of like, have you checked Ye's Twitter in the last like 2 days?
Well, I don't know. I'm all over the place.
I'm kind of following it really closely right now because everything he's saying, I'm like, this is just fucking Anton LaVey. What the hell? Like, I'm reading it and I'm like, this is just pure Satanism he's spouting at this point.
Well,
I don't mean that in like, because I know he calls himself a Christian, but like what I'm seeing is just pure Satanism in there. Like, yeah. It's like I can't call him anything but a satanic artist because it's just pure Satanism, and I can't even explain all of it because it's just so much. It's like a sensory overload if I try to explain it, but it's like pure Satanism.
Right, and I think that's a lot of LaVey's influence, and even Crowley, absolutely, their
like,
influence.
Everyone that like takes in Kanye West's like words and like actually like sees it, which I see. I'm seeing a lot more people kind of seem to realize, like, you know, he's kind of making some sense.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, I love that. And well, that again, prophetic, when you're ahead of when you're able to have the fortitude, the guts to say what you think is true, or say what you think is the future, or say what you think should be the future. You get hurt, beaten up, ridiculed, but at the end of the day, you're hearing things like this. Like, I think what he's saying is, and I see what you're saying. A lot of people are like, go on. He's making a point here. He's making some good points. And I think, you know, his way is a Chicago shock jock way. Like, that stuff, the way he's doing things comes out of Chicago. And it comes from Steve Dahl. Steve Dahl started talking this before him. You would never hear conversations like Kanye or anything like even Trump. Things were real tame.
Well, you know what I'm seeing with Trump
is, hold on. Let me just finish that thought. So Kanye uses this shock doc. He shocks you into paying attention to him, and then the nuance of what he's saying, he lets go. So he wants to open you up. He opens you up. He opens up your passages, whatever it is, and then he hits you. And that's like the brilliance of that shock that he's influenced by the aesthetic terrorism movement. He's influenced by that, and you can see that with his bosom shirts and everything else. So he's doing our stuff. He's using our tactics. So when he does what he does, I'm like, that's just what we did. That's what that 24-hour show you were listening to all the time. That's what we were doing. Exactly. He's not doing anything we didn't do. I mean, he's doing the exact thing we did. Picking on things that he knows are outrageous, are going to, you know, race, shit like that, sex. You know, he's basically mimicking the aesthetic terrorism movement in a lot of ways. But they're forgotten. We're forgotten. But the influence isn't. And our influence is alive in that, in Kanye. I can see that. And it should be, because he's paying attention to art. He's an artist, so he was paying attention to what was going on when he was going to art school in Japan and stuff like that. When we were doing our thing, and he was a kid, he was paying attention to that.
Yeah, and then it's like with Trump, you're the one that's started saying, but Trump is the most satanic president we have ever had. I personally don't.
In my lifetime. I
do think that there is one other president that would be labeled as such, and that would be Teddy Roosevelt, and there is that direct influence there.
Yeah, well, that's a whole different thing. I don't really like I don't care about what happened outside of my lifetime too much in my conversations, because that becomes too much of, this conversation will go sideways, because I'm going to be asking too many questions about Teddy Roosevelt. So I can only talk about presidents within my lifetime, because the history of Teddy Roosevelt is going to be written by the victors or someone else. I wasn't there to see it, but I am here to witness. I am a physical witness to, from Reagan to Trump. From Reagan to Trump, I've witnessed those presidencies. And so that's why I say what I say. A lot of people would say the founding fathers, Ben Franklin, George Washington, the founding fathers were all satanic. The people who wrote the Declaration of Independence were satanic. That's a concept a lot of people have. I think Matt, I forget his name, Paradise, he has a book, a zine he put out at one time with a bunch of quotes from the founding fathers that were very satanic. So in a historic concept, you can say that, but I'm only talking about within my lifetime, and something that we can actually is tangible to us, versus something we have to trust what we read.
Well, I'm just trying to go off like the past, because you asked me about the past.
Yeah, the past of Satanism.
I know, and I'm doing the past of Satanism as well as its lineage, because the founding fathers as well as Teddy Roosevelt, I'm pretty sure are all de facto Satanists in some sense.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm looking. I'm looking for within the concept of like the 60s to now, within this lifetime.
All right, 60s.
I mean, if we're going to talk about the entire history of things, we're going to go into Beethoven. We're going to go into the, it's going to be a really long, it's going to be a long call. It's not going to make a lot of sense anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I would personally be fine with that, but I don't feel like doing another 24-hour thing for at least another few months. Yeah,
but those things just spiral. You have to have focus when you're trying to publish something like an interview like this, or I should say it's not an interview, it's a conversation in a satanic almanac. It has to have some sort of focus. It can't go all the left and right. And well, let's talk about Teddy Roosevelt now and Trump. It's like, what the fuck is that conversation? It has nothing to do with what I was saying. Trump is the most satanic president in my lifetime. And I say that because I don't even like to talk about the guy, because it gives him too much power. And I don't agree with him on a lot of stuff that he's doing. But I also try to judge these people when they get out of office. I wait to see what happens, but for me, as real as politics, I only mention that Trump is the most satanic president because of how he operates, where there is no rules, there is no truths. And I use him as an example of that, but it's not an example of this satanic leader or someone that I think represents Satanism well. I just think he uses satanic ideals to get what he wants. But I don't think he would be a great representative for Satanism, let's say. Maybe. I mean, I don't, I use that in a real small example of what I'm talking about there, versus, American history. Fuck, whatever about that shit. Politics. My point is Teddy Roosevelt, all the fucking presidents, fuck all of them. They're people that are trying to control people. I don't need a master. I don't need a president. I don't need a boss. I'm an actual Satanist though. So I don't think, as far as a personality that might run for president, they might all be satanic at some point. They are all looking to climb power. They're all looking for power and have control over people and weird shit like that. but the way in my lifetime to watch how things have played out, this dude's satanic, and I love it, but I don't love him. And I don't. One of my point is here is I don't think politics has a lot to do with Satanism, even though everything you do is political in this society. I think Satanism is a very individual and impulsive kind of thing. And so once Trump comes in the conversation, it makes it again political. Like, we're talking about presidents, and it's like I'd rather talk about magicians than people who are faces of power, because I don't know if these people even have power. I think they go to actual Satanists. People, I think they go to actual rich people and ask them to give them money so they can be a president. And so they'll do what their masters. Trump is a puppet. Presidents are puppets of people who have real power, real money, bankers, stuff like that, real stuff. And so it's like, if I were to, if any, like, yeah, like think about this. The Pope is more powerful than Trump. The Pope is the most powerful man in the world. And you see that when you see this new Pope come into office, royalty bows to the Pope. Presidents, kings, queens, all of them bow and kiss his ring. All of them. And so it's like, that's power. That's motherfucking power. They've got a goddamn gangs going. The Catholic Church has got some shit going on. And I've also spoke to people like the guy who runs the Truth Court. He's friends with the guy who runs archive.org. And he talks about how the Roman Church, the Roman Catholic Church in Rome, their library under the Vatican has the most occult works in the world that you will never, ever see. You will never be able to read. They were able to get access to part of the library, the guy from archive.org and him. And, he talks to me, he told me there's hidden knowledge under the Vatican. And these guys aren't paranoid, crazy. These people are the people that created the internet. Like Brewster Kahle and my guy that works on Truth Court with me, the guy who runs that, he created a lot of the AI that you see today 50 years ago. So I work with people who are, like this guy has 3 doctrines, 3 doctorate degrees. The other guy has 2. They're really smart, very accomplished. They built the fucking illusion of the internet. They built the internet, so they're not like conspiracy theorists. And so the Pope has an amazing amount of power. And when I heard about the occult books, the hidden knowledge he has under the Vatican, I would imagine that's a great reason, a great deal of their power is the information they hold, the knowledge they have.
Yeah. And that's what I see a lot of the last, 60 years of Satanism as having. I think there's a lot of things like Kanye West is taking from and learning from with it. I think there's a lot within that influence. I mean, I don't think gay marriage would have happened if Anton LaVey hadn't, been so, like, I guess, okay with it, like, nonchalantly.
I definitely I would definitely say that he did a large part to help that situation out. Absolutely. He was a person who was okay with it. And he amongst like people who are attracted to power and dark art, let's say, to convince those people to not be angry at gay people or women or people of color was a big deal, because, as anyone who's attracted to power, you can easily get a bunch of clowns that you can get to beat people up for you. Let's say because you don't like people of color, or you don't like gay people or whatever, as like Nazis do. And so it's like LaVey didn't do that. He did the exact opposite of that, which is cool.
Yeah, and then, I don't, also among those lines, I don't think a lot of trans things right now would be so, I guess, able to be done, even though I know that's a really reductive term, all things considered. but I don't think a lot of it would be so present if not for, someone like Marilyn Manson or, David Bowie or Annie Lennox.
Right. Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
The influence, I think, reverberates, and I really find it interesting to see all that influence, especially from like a lot of the more, I guess, less liked figures within those things. Like I love Varg Vikernes. I find his ideas fascinating. I think he's quite a I think he's a pretty brilliant mind. I don't necessarily find his conclusions correct all the time, but I also don't know. Maybe he could be correct. I don't know exactly. But I just find the whole influence of all that, because Varg wouldn't have existed without Anton LaVey. Like none of that black metal stuff would have happened without Anton LaVey. It all comes back to LaVey with a lot of this stuff.
I think so. I think that's that, again, that influence that never dies but is always forgotten. That people are, I think it's this, I also believe in that 8 generations myth. Like, it takes a long time for change. So I think the one thing I know, I know that Satanism is a tool of change. Like I said, it erodes constructs. And so I hope people continue to use that tool of change to move humanity forward versus enslaving humanity.
And in terms, Church of Satan people can understand, as LaVey said, the Satanism fetish is reformation.
Who says this?
LaVey.
And what are you getting at by it?
Because we see a lot of the time, anytime anyone says something like that, the church, like a lot of Church of Satan people, assume that means some sort of collective or group organized effort.
Okay.
Or some sort of like virtue signaling good guy badge thing, like saying that all Satanists should work towards one common goal, which in a sense they are, if you consider that self-preservation is the highest law, but that's individual.
That's not a common goal. It's a self. So we're really not like, I've already said this. I'm glad you reiterate, you're confirming it with the LaVey quote, but yeah, I get what you're saying. It erodes construct. Correct. Yeah. I'm going to ask you something. Zena is about, there's a Zena LaVey quote. Zena LaVey on LaVey and Satanist behavior in practice is best understood as dark triad personality disorder with cosplay and ritual fetishes. That's how Zena describes Satanism. What do you think of that?
Was that in the Jordan Peterson interview?
I don't know. I'm asking you what you thought of that.
I think that there's a good amount of truth to that. I see a lot of people who put on a sort of this, just it's so I see it as really self-destructive in a sense, like front of just pure misanthropy and just everybody should, like, we need, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but there's this weird fronting I see, and it's like you said, the perverse ego, and I'm trying not to like reiterate a lot of stuff right now.
Oh, it's okay.
But I also have a problem with the whole dark triad idea, especially with how Machiavellianism is thrown in there, especially because I read Machiavelli, and I'm like, I don't see how this is some sort of negative idea. This is just, it's like Might is Right. It's just explaining the reality of how people rule, how leaders rule, if that makes sense. It's no different than the Dune books. But in another sense, I can see that people dislike it because it can also inform totalitarianism on how to run, but so could, the people that voted for a totalitarian government. I think it was Sylvia Plath that said every woman loves a fascist.
That's funny. Go on.
What was the question again? I kind of got
Well,
lost.
it was talking about Zena LeVay and her quote about the dark triad. And you were going on about dark triad stuff and Machiavellianism and stuff.
Well, I see a lot of that, though. I also wonder how much of that is coming from her own self, or maybe her own experiences. I won't say anything because I don't know for certain, but I've heard interesting things within interviews with like Stanton and stuff, but I'm not going to claim to know anything. I've just heard interesting things.
Yeah, of course. You don't have to put this disclaimer on it. I think everyone knows that's the case.
Well, I'm not going to say anything for fact because I don't know. I wasn't.
Well, you
there.
heard, but you don't. It doesn't matter. It is a fact. If Stanton LeVay said something, you could say, "Well, Stanton said this." You know, you source your stuff. Who knows what if you have to deal with everything you're standing in the room or seeing videos of it, that is a ridiculous concept for younger people to think that you need such extreme receipts. You really don't, and you don't have them in life, and like most people in power aren't there because they had video evidence. Most people in prison aren't there because there was video evidence and a ton of receipts. They're there because of circumstantial evidence. They're there because of other nuances that are spoken and evidence that's weighed out against them or for them based on words, spells, word, you know. So you could, it's better just to speak your mind and say, well, Stanton LeVay said this about Zena, because basically you're saying, well, I know I've read some stuff, but I don't want to say it because I don't know if it's true. Well, it doesn't matter. If you've got a source, just say it. Say it's so, most people, if it's Stanton LeVay, most people are going to discount him as a source.
That's true. Well, Stanton has said some interesting things in interviews that I find when I hear something like that from her, I'm like, how much of that is projection based on, what I've heard Stanton say on something like that Off to the Witch podcast or anything. But
beautiful. That's exactly what I would say. That's exactly the point. You don't have to be afraid to say things like that. What the fuck? Just say it. Like that's exactly it. And
but the nuance of it is that there is also Zena's word against his. I haven't heard Zena say anything on it. I have not heard or seen her comment on it. I'm not.
That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. Again, there doesn't need to be two sides. What Stanton's feeling, you want to go these jive things. Stanton's feelings are valid. What he said is valid. We can talk about what he said without having a ton of evidence and having the other side. You can see it based on circumstantial evidence, how LeVay's family was treated, how his daughter acts, how she was taught to act, how she says, this is how my father taught me to act, so I'm going to do this in this way. These Stanton and Bo Zena are some of the most knowledgeable sources as far as Satanism goes. They grew up in it. Same with Carla. So it's like, I don't really need to hear Zena's side about Stanton to talk about a general subject of a personality disorder like she's talking about. I think what she's saying is very true in a large degree. When you start groups, Christianity, Catholicism, Judaism, you have a lot of wackos that are attached to it that use, and I've said this before, and I think I said this in the Satanic Almanac, the first one, is that people will use Satanism to mask their personality disorders or their criminal behavior. They're like, oh, this, and a lot of people will use Christianity or Catholicism or something else to mask their aggression or their wants or needs or stuff that they're ashamed of or stuff that's socially unacceptable. They'll be like, I'm going to go blow up an abortion clinic because I'm angry at the world and I want to have violence. I want to hurt someone. And so I can put a face on this and say it was for the God, it was for my Catholic God or my Christian God. And I think, a lot of people, I think what Zena says has a lot of weight. I know it has a lot of weight. She's Zena LeVay. And I think what you're saying is true too. She's projecting a bit like that's exactly it. That's why it becomes almost empirical, because she's lived that life. She's lived that life. Even if it's a subconscious honesty, she's lived that life. And to know the life that she lived and to know the life Stanton lived, and Anton lived, and Diane lived, and Carla lived. I know this. I bet I'm an insider.
Yeah, and then, I also would even extend that sort of projection even to Stanton, because, I was talking to Brian Werner a few years ago, and I heard some interesting things about why he and Marilyn Manson ended up on bad terms. And, I think it extends even to people like, I guess even myself I could consider, because I'm not going to point fingers, because there's still 4 pointed back at me, like anything I say can and easily be reflected on myself. And if someone says it, it can also be reflected on them. I think it's a struggle Satanists have to deal with their ego. And at this point, I don't even want to say I'm a Satanist. I just, if someone wants to call me that, that's fine. I just don't give a fuck, if that makes sense. But there's that perverse ego that's also there. Like, I'm a Satanist. I'm this alien elite, as Peter Gilmore calls it in the Satanic Scriptures, which, like, okay, it's this alien elite, but what does that actually mean? Because what it attracts is people who are essentially bottom feeders and stuff. I see, like, and it's like, I got people pissy at me for saying this, but Robert Leuthold of the Church of Satan is absolutely a bottom feeder, and I don't really give a fuck what anyone says. That guy, like, went on for months about me and another person as 16-year-olds just for talking to you, and insinuated all sorts of, like, weird shit. And it's like, based on what? Because we dared to ask a few fucking questions? It's this weird, like, and I think it's part of the fact that there is that authoritarian bent to Satanism, where it's like, you have to be on top, but it's like, at what point does it become counterproductive? Because, like, I got, people pissy at me for saying shit about him because, oh no, he's in a wheelchair. So what if he's in a wheelchair? I'm going to hold him to the standards he's holding us to. If he's going to throw a piss fit and act like a, like this, insecure, vulnerable narcissist, which I'm using in the correct term here, like, why shouldn't I say that there's a dark triad in Satanism that is incredibly destructive and counterproductive? And I'm not saying that Robert Leuthold lives a shittier, counterproductive life. I'm just saying that there's this evidence of just, I would say, solipsism and vulnerable narcissism that runs rampant within Satanism, whether people notice it or not.
Well, yeah, well, that's just basically what Zena's saying. That's what she's talking about. I think there's a lot,
I would agree with her.
But it's not like, I think you can say bottom feeders, or you could say young people, and so people that are seekers of different knowledge, all are fine with me. That's when I try to talk about, like, what I've tried to say about the Satanic Temple people. I think they're seekers. They're looking for a different way. They're looking for something that's different that they can cling to, that might be a different idea. So they're trying to understand something. So for that, I applaud them. I applaud them that they're trying to look outside their box, which, is probably whatever it is, Christianity, whatever, maybe it's even atheism, whatever it is. And so you can call them bottom feeders, or you can call them young and dumb. But I can see where you're going with Robert, because he's not young and dumb. He's been around for a while, and he's a tool. And there's not everyone's going to be a president. Not everyone's going to be the king or a reverend or whatever else. So he's a tool of Peter's. He's a lapdog, and he does what he does. And that makes Peter happy. And so he continues to do it. I'm sure, he'll talk to Peter, and Peter will go, oh, that was funny. That was good. And so he's going to continue to do that. Peter's not going to really encourage him to be a proper person or communicate differently too much. Maybe he would. But I think what Zena's saying is true with a large number of people who are attracted to Satanism. They got a lot of problems. And I would say a lot of people who are attracted to religion. or people giving them answers have a lot of problems.
It's like I think you said there's a thing of mama's boys and people that are really submissive, projecting dominance.
Yeah, that is that, and that's not necessarily the same thing as I'm talking about now. It's like growing up and trying to learn things. But I think there is that there, when LeVay talks about dominance and submission and stuff like that, there is that is something that is involved in our species. So we're talking about humanity as an animal, as a species, Satanists are. And so when we talk about that, we're talking about dominance and submission, and then you have people attracted to that conversation, and so on and so forth. My point is that, I get where you're going with Robert, and I think what Zena's saying is true to a point, and I also think, though, I would add to that it's nuanced, and I say that when you start to define yourself as a Satanist, you're an extremist. You're looking for trouble, or you're looking to project power to move you, to protect you, to scare people. And so I think we're extremists in a large, people who are attracted to that word are very extreme. What are they extreme at? I'm not really sure until I get to know them. Extremely crazy, who knows? Extremely fun, extremely dark. Maybe they have a great sense of humor. I find a lot of Satanists that are just dark and have a great sense of humor and laugh at the whole thing, which I love.
What's the difference between any of those?
What?
My question is, what's the difference between any of those at a certain point?
Any of what?
Any of those traits you just listed.
Well, they're all different traits. I mean,
well,
some people.
I think a Satanist would be all of those in one, except none of them at the same time.
Well, yeah, you can have you're obviously you're everything at once. I guess you could say you have emotions, but there's people who have character, and you're not everything at once. You're because then you become nothing. There's people who have a different sense of humor than other people, and so that's what I'm talking about. There's people who come into it with a dark sense of humor, but they're not criminal. They're not. They don't have these weird criminal issues. So their character is bringing them to see. They're seeking knowledge, and not everyone's the same when they seek knowledge. So we have stratification here, and you have people that have different characters, and some are criminal. Some have a character that they have a great sense of humor about Satanism. Be predatory, and some people are using it to stop predators. Those are very different things. And yes, as life is very individual, circumstantial, and nuanced, yes, you can experience all of those things in a lifetime. That's true. But I don't know if they reflect your character. Some people have a victim mentality throughout their life. Some people are predators throughout their life, and they may experience being victimized. The predator may experience being prey, but at their heart, they're predators, and they're looking to predate, to be on top of something. So for me,